A light in the mist. There is a place where the sea seems to breathe, where the wind moves through the grass like an old song, and the fog arrives as silently as sleep. Off the coast of northern Maine, in a village forgotten by time, stands a lighthouse. Cold, tall, and watching. The locals call it Widow's Watch, though no one remembers who gave it that name. It is said that when the mist rolls in, a single light can still be seen, flickering from its tower. But the lighthouse has been abandoned for decades. This story begins not with the light, but with the woman who watched it. Her name was Eleanor Reed, a quiet woman in her 50s who came to the village in the autumn of 1911. She arrived alone, with just one suitcase and a red wool coat, the kind that stood out even in the graying coastal world. Locals whispered that she was a widow, though she never said so herself. She took a room above the bakery, where the scent of bread rose each morning like a kind of comfort. She didn't ask much of anyone, bought her groceries, wrote letters, walked the cliffs each evening, always stopping at the bench that faced the sea. Across the narrow bay, the lighthouse stood on its island, unreachable at high tide. It hadn't been in use for years, but still, she watched it. No one knew what Eleanor was waiting for, or if she was waiting at all. The only thing certain was this: she never missed a single evening. It wasn't always fog and silence. In her younger years, Eleanor had been lively, even joyful. Her letters now, yellowed with time, spoke of music, travel, and a summer spent teaching on the coast. That was where she first met the lighthouse keeper, Thomas Hale, a quiet man older than her by a decade, with eyes that had seen more storms than most sailors. Their friendship began in shared silences, a wave, a book exchanged, a meal eaten without rush. Over the months, that friendship deepened. There were no promises, no dramatic gestures, just time. Letters passed between them, always handed off discreetly, as though their affection was something fragile. A lighthouse keeper had duties, after all, and Eleanor had a life to return to. But life rarely waits politely. One stormy evening, Thomas helped her across the rocks to the mainland, his coat soaked, her red wool coat clinging to her shoulders. She said she'd be back in a week. He lit the lantern for her once as she left. She didn't return that summer, or the next. Years passed, and then, in 1911, she came back, not to visit, to stay. Some said she was chasing a memory. Others claimed she'd lost her mind. But those who spoke to Eleanor, few as they were, found her sharp, warm, even witty. Not broken, just distant. No one knows what drew her to the bench each evening. Sometimes she sat in silence. Other times she read aloud from a book. And now and then she seemed to speak into the wind, as if in conversation with someone who wasn't there. The lighthouse remained dark. No supplies were delivered. No boats came and went. Yet on several nights people claimed to see a light flickering in the tower, briefly, as though someone were testing an old bulb, or sending a signal. When asked, Eleanor only smiled, a soft, secret smile. Was Thomas still alive? Had he returned? Or was the light something else entirely? Decades later, the lighthouse remains, weather-worn and sealed off by the Coast Guard. But now and then, especially on foggy evenings, visitors say the same thing. A light, just one, faint, moving. They say the woman in the red coat still comes to the bench, that her coat is as bright as ever, and that she smiles even now. Maybe it's just a story, or maybe some lights never go out. The woman who never left there were no goodbyes when she arrived. No warm greetings, no family waiting with open arms. Just the steady rhythm of the ocean and the scent of salt in the wind. The villagers watched from behind curtains as she stepped off the cart that brought her from the train station. One red coat, one suitcase. A woman who looked like she belonged to another century. They didn't know her name at first. She was simply the woman in red, quiet, dignified, distant. She passed through the market with the same slow pace each week, choosing her apples one by one, always with gloved hands. She paid in coins that looked older than they should have been. She never haggled. Children said she spoke to herself. Teenagers dared each other to follow her to the cliffs. But no one truly knew her. Not yet. Eleanor Reed wasn't trying to be mysterious. She had simply run out of things to explain. After a certain point in life, words no longer soften pain. And explanations rarely change what people choose to believe. She had taught literature in Boston for over 20 years, had once been engaged, had once broken hearts and had hers broken too. But all that was before the coast, before Thomas, before silence became her closest companion. The bakery was the only place that felt like routine. She liked the morning warmth, the quiet shuffle of flour and breath. The girl behind the counter, Anna, didn't ask questions. She just smiled and filled Eleanor's paper bag with bread and sweet rolls. There was a kind of truce between them, an unspoken agreement to let silence be enough. Each day after breakfast, Eleanor walked, rain or shine, her coat flaring like a flame against the gray. She walked the same path each time, from the bakery, past the post office, along the cliff edge to the bench. Always to the bench, always facing the sea. When she sat, her hands were often still, folded in her lap, but her eyes moved across the water. Up the tower, following lines only she could see. Villagers came to expect her. Some waved, some kept their distance. A few brought offerings, wildflowers, cookies, sketches. She thanked them with a nod, a quiet thank you, and nothing more. It wasn't rudeness, it was reverence. She was protecting something. Sometimes she wrote, not long letters but fragments, lines of poetry, questions and memories written in small, looping handwriting. Once the wind carried a page away and a boy caught it. It read, "Did he see me when I waved or only the storm behind me?" The boy kept the note. He would grow up, join the Navy, and return years later to stare at the same bench, wondering. Some of the villagers began to say she was a ghost, that she never aged, that her red coat never faded. But others pointed out the truth. She was getting older, her steps slower, her hair thinner, her voice softer. Yet something about her remained unchanged, steady, solid. As though time had simply paused around her. The children who once dared each other to follow her became teenagers who sat near her in silence. Some claimed she knew when they were sad, even when they said nothing. One girl, whose father had gone missing at sea, swore Eleanor reached for her hand and held it without a word. Just for a moment, then let go. No advice, no promises, just presence. And then came the year the government sent a man to inspect the lighthouse. His name was Miller, younger, eager, practical. He tried to speak with Eleanor, but she said very little. On the second evening, he camped near the shore, said he'd seen light from the tower. The next morning he was pale, said nothing, left on the noon train, and didn't return. Eleanor watched him go, then returned to the bench, as always. Why did she stay? Some say she was waiting for someone. Others believe she was punishing herself for something no one could name. But those who watched closely knew it was simpler than that. She stayed because love had no end for her, because what she felt was not dependent on return or reward. It was just there, in the salt, in the wind, in the silence. There are many kinds of strength. Eleanor's was quiet, invisible, but it shaped everything around her. Today, if you walk the cliff path at dusk, you might still see the bench, the sea, the tower. And if the light is just right, you might see the red coat, just there, at the edge of the world, watching, waiting, or simply remembering. Letters across the sea. Long before the bench became a ritual, before the red coat became a symbol, there were letters. Dozens of them. Folded carefully, sealed in simple envelopes, passed between hands like small pieces of breath. No one knew they existed. Not then. Not even the postmaster. They were never mailed, never stamped. They traveled another way, and though none of them remain now, their words echo still, in the mist, in the wood of the lighthouse door, in the footsteps along the cliffs. This is the part of the story few have heard, the part written in ink, not spoken aloud. In the summer of 1897, Eleanor was 34. She had taken a temporary post as a teacher in the coastal village of Belhaven. The school was small, just 10 students, the building older than the chalkboards. She arrived with books, long skirts, and a sense of order shaped by years in the city. Thomas Hale lived across the bay. The lighthouse had been manned by his family for 3 generations. He had taken over the post after his brother's passing and rarely left the island. Their paths crossed once, in the village, on a supply day. Eleanor was buying candles. Thomas was paying for kerosene. Their conversation lasted no more than 4 sentences. But something lingered. A pause. A glance. Later that week, she found a note tucked under a stone on the bench near the cliffs. It seems we share an affection for quiet things. It was unsigned. Eleanor hesitated for a day, then wrote back, I find quiet more honest than most words. She placed her reply under the same stone. So began a rhythm, a slow exchange. Not every day, not even every week, but enough. Notes turned into letters, letters turned into pages. They spoke of the sea, of books, of memory. Never of love, not yet. Thomas wrote in a steady hand, precise, thoughtful. He described the light, the weather, the birds that landed on the tower rail. Eleanor replied with poetry, with questions, with dreams. No one else knew. To the village, she was simply the teacher. To the coast, he was the keeper. But to each other, they became something unspoken, a shared silence. As the summer deepened, so did the words. Eleanor began to visit the bench more often. She would sit for hours, not always writing, sometimes just watching the island. The villagers noticed her calm. Her students said she smiled more. One evening, a package arrived at the schoolhouse. A book, worn but carefully wrapped. Inside, a note, for when the fog won't let you see the water. It was a novel by Woolf, her favorite. Eleanor didn't write back. Instead, she stood at the edge of the cliffs, held the book to her chest, and waved. The next day, a lantern flickered in the tower. Some of the letters became more personal. Thomas wrote about his brother, about the solitude that came after. He said the sea didn't comfort him the way it once had. Eleanor confessed that city life had drained her, that she feared the quiet only until she learned to sit inside it. Still, no promises were made. The tide controlled their meetings. The distance remained, but the letters, they built something sturdy, something neither wind nor wave could carry away. One note from Thomas read, If I were braver, I'd build a bridge, but I think you'd miss the walk. Eleanor didn't reply with words, just left a red ribbon under the stone. The letters stopped in early September, not from lack of feeling, but because Eleanor had to leave. Her contract ended. The school had another teacher coming. She packed her things quietly. On her final day, she left one last letter. It read, I won't say goodbye, because you taught me that the sea never does. She waited by the bench until sunset, then turned slowly and walked back to the village. That night, the lighthouse burned brighter than ever before. Years later, no one could find the letters. Some said she took them with her. Others believed Thomas had hidden them in the tower walls. One story claimed they were lost to a storm, but strange things linger. Visitors sometimes report finding scraps of paper among the rocks, torn edges, faded ink, lines that seem too deliberate to be random. Come home when the fog clears. I remember the sound of your silence. I am still here. Of course, most say it's just salt water and sea wind, teasing the imagination, but a few believe. The bench still faces the sea. The stone is still there, cracked but holding, and sometimes when no one is looking, a folded note appears, dry even in the rain, empty, waiting. A dance before the storm. There's a kind of silence that arrives before a storm. It isn't peaceful. It hums beneath your skin like a warning. The birds go quiet. The trees lean in. The air changes shape. That summer, the storm didn't come all at once. It built itself slowly, in clouds that darkened each day, in tides that rose a little higher, in winds that spoke in strange, unsettled tones. Eleanor felt it first, not in the sky, but in her chest, in the space between one letter and the next, in the absence of a reply. She knew something was shifting, not in the world, but in the waiting. By late August, the weather had turned uneasy. The villagers noticed it too. Boats stayed docked. Fishermen smoked more than they talked. Children were kept inside. But Eleanor still walked to the bench each evening, still placed a folded page beneath the stone. And then one morning, without warning, there was a letter waiting. No envelope, no name. Just a single line. The tide is lowest at moon's edge. Come then. It was Thomas's hand. That night Eleanor did not sleep. She paced her small room, held the old letters to her chest, smelled the salt in the fibers. She wore her red coat as she stepped into the dark. The path to the lighthouse was not easy. Even at low tide, the rocks were slick, the wind erratic. But she moved with purpose, the lantern in her hand trembling but lit. Thomas was waiting at the edge of the island, taller than she remembered, grayer at the temples, but still him. He didn't speak, just held out his hand. Together they walked the short path to the tower, stepping over tangled roots and seagrass. Inside, the room was warm with oil light. Simple. Lived in. Eleanor placed her coat over a chair. For a while they said nothing. The silence between them was no longer distance. It was comfort. And then without music, without fanfare, he held out his arms. May I? She nodded, and they danced. It was not a dance for show, not perfect, but real. Eleanor's head resting near his shoulder, his hands steady at her back. The tower creaked around them. The sea moved beyond. There was something ancient in that moment, something that had waited years to be lived. They did not speak of what came next. They did not ask how long they had. They simply were. And when the wind picked up, Thomas opened the window and let it in. The storm is close, he said. She nodded, but did not move. They stayed together until dawn. Eleanor left before the tide returned. Thomas walked her halfway across the rocky stretch, his coat over her shoulders. At the edge, where water would soon reclaim the land, they stopped. He reached for her hand, and for a moment, neither of them said goodbye. Then gently he let go. She walked the rest of the way alone. Some say the storm that followed was the worst in 50 years. Others say it never came at all, just hovered over the bay like a question. The lighthouse was seen burning brightly through the haze for 2 nights after. Then suddenly, dark. No one saw Thomas again. Eleanor never spoke of that night, not even once. But she never returned to the tower, and she never stopped walking to the bench. Years later, a journal was found among Eleanor's things. One page stood out, a single line. We danced, and I remembered how to breathe. It was dated the day before the storm. There are those who say that sometimes, on nights when the wind rises just right, You can hear the floorboards of the lighthouse creak with invisible footsteps. That somewhere inside, two figures move in rhythm, no music, no sound, just motion, a dance, still going, still waiting. The silence after the signal. Some absences echo louder than presence, a missing sound, a silence where a rhythm used to be. The villagers of Belhaven spoke often of storms, but after that night, they spoke less of the weather and more of what wasn't there. The light had gone out, not just in the tower but in Eleanor's eyes. In the days following the storm, Eleanor continued her quiet rituals. She taught her students. She watered the school's small garden. She walked to the bench. But she no longer waited for letters. No more stones, no more pages, no more red ribbons caught in the sea wind. Her face remained calm, but something behind it had changed. The villagers noticed. They didn't ask questions, but they watched. The lighthouse, once a steadfast glow, remained dark. The island, always distant, now seemed unreachable, and Eleanor, though present, moved as if listening for something that had stopped speaking. A few weeks later, a young boy named Isaac, the son of a fisherman, said he saw something strange. He'd been playing near the shoreline, looking through an old spyglass, when he claimed to see a flash from the lighthouse. Not the bright, sweeping light of warning, but a single flicker, brief, intentional, he told his father. His father laughed, but Isaac kept watching. The next evening, he saw it again. He ran to the village. A small group followed him back to the cliff. Nothing, only wind and sea. The spyglass, when passed around, showed nothing but fog. But Isaac insisted it was a signal. Someone's still there. Whispers began. Had Thomas returned? Was someone else on the island? Or was it simply the last breath of an empty tower? Eleanor said nothing, but that night she took out her old letters, read them by candlelight. One line from the early days stood out. If you ever can't see the light, just listen for the sea, I'll answer. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat at the edge of the cliffs, eyes closed, listening. But the waves only told their own stories. In the following days, odd things happened. A book that had once gone missing from Eleanor's school desk reappeared, dry despite a week of rain. A red ribbon was found tied to a branch near the lighthouse trail. Too high for a child, too fresh for time to have weathered it, and one morning a villager claimed to hear a faint humming coming from across the bay, like someone turning the gears of a lantern. Theories spread. Some believed Thomas had never left, that he lived in secret, surviving on stored food, too proud to return, too haunted to be seen. Others claimed he had died that night, but his spirit remained, lighting the lantern out of habit or love. And a few whispered something stranger, that the tower itself had learned, that it remembered their dance, that it missed them both. Eleanor never confirmed or denied any story. She simply returned to the bench each evening, sometimes with a book, sometimes with nothing but the sea. One night she brought the spyglass, held it to her eye, waited. And as the fog shifted, just for a second, she smiled. No one knows what she saw. Some say grief changes shape, that it becomes a companion, a rhythm of silence. In Belhaven, the lighthouse was never officially closed, but no one took over the post. It stood empty. Yet sometimes, late at night, the beam returns. A soft glow, no pattern, no warning, just light and silence. Whispers in the fog. Fog has a way of carrying voices, stretching sound, turning whispers into echoes. In Belhaven, the fog stayed longer after the storm, thicker, heavier, almost deliberate, and with it came questions about what was real, about what was remembered, about what still lingered. By early autumn, the rhythm of life in the village had shifted. Fishermen cast shorter lines. Lights stayed on longer in homes. The bakery began closing earlier, and more people stopped by the bench, some out of curiosity, others out of something closer to reverence. They would come at dusk, pause in silence, and glance toward the island, waiting maybe to see something Eleanor once saw. She no longer explained her visits. She no longer needed to. Her presence became part of the place itself. Children began telling stories, that the lighthouse wasn't empty, that you could hear music if you pressed your ear to a conch shell at the shoreline, that a man in a long coat walked the water's edge when the moon was thin. Eleanor never corrected them. She only smiled. And sometimes when no one was watching, she'd hum, a tune no one could name. One afternoon, a woman from the city came to Belhaven. She was a historian, researching coastal outposts. She asked about the lighthouse, about its last keeper, about Eleanor. The locals said little, not out of secrecy, but out of protection. It's not just a place, the baker told her. It's a story, and not every story wants to be reopened. The woman left with nothing but silence and a faint sense that she'd missed something important. The fog rolled in thicker that week, and with it, something else. Footprints in the sand that vanished halfway to the water. A journal page pinned to a tree with no wind to move it. The distant sound of a bell, though the tower had long lost its chime. Some began leaving small offerings near the lighthouse trail. A scarf, a stone, a sprig of lavender, not in fear, but in respect. One night, a boy disappeared for 2 hours. His mother panicked. The village searched. They found him near the base of the cliffs, curled beneath the bench. Safe, asleep. When asked why he'd wandered so far, he said, "I heard someone calling. Not loud, just warm." The villagers didn't press him, but they started keeping their doors closed tighter at night. Theories began to spread again, but now they weren't about ghosts or hauntings. They were softer. That some loves are so strong, they bend the rules of time. That grief can leave footprints. That memory isn't just what we carry, but what we leave behind. The lighthouse became a kind of quiet shrine. No plaques, no markers, just space and whispers. Eleanor's health began to fade that winter, slowly, gently. She continued her walks, her quiet, her songs. And when spring finally returned, she told the baker, "If you ever hear music in the fog, don't follow it. Just listen. That's enough." She passed away 1 week later. The bench by the cliff is still there. The path still worn. The lighthouse, though shuttered, still stands. And sometimes when the sea is calm and the fog drapes low, people say they hear something, a melody, faint, unfinished, still drifting across the water. Where the light never fades, some places are more than earth and stone. Some stories linger longer than the people who live them, and some lights, though unseen, never truly go out. In Belhaven, they still speak of Eleanor, but never in the past tense. Spring softened into summer. The cliffs bloomed wild with sea thistle and foxglove. The bench, weather-worn, stood firm. A new teacher arrived at the school, young, curious, kind. She asked about the trail, the bench, the woman who used to walk there. She listened more than she spoke, the baker told her, and somehow she always knew when it would rain. The teacher smiled, and one morning she walked the path Eleanor once walked, sat on the bench, and waited. She found a small envelope beneath a stone. No address, no date. Inside, a single card. 4 words handwritten in faded ink. "You are not alone." She never told anyone, but from that day she too began walking the path each evening. Not for answers, but for presence. The lighthouse remains closed, but not forgotten. Each year on the anniversary of the storm, the village gathers. No speeches, no ceremony. They leave candles on the shore, one for each letter never answered, one for each step never retraced, one for the dance, and always one for the light. Over time, the fog became gentler, the winds calmer, children grew, left, returned, stories softened. But still on certain nights the sea seems to hold its breath, the waves still hush, and somewhere in the quiet, a rhythm remains. Two figures, turning slowly, still together, still waiting. There are no photographs of Thomas and Eleanor, no recordings of their voices. But in Belhaven, their story is everywhere. In the way the bench leans ever so slightly toward the sea, in the way the fog lingers just a moment longer near the lighthouse, and in the way, every now and then, a single beam of light appears on the water. Brief, steady, familiar. Some call it coincidence. Others call it memory. But a few, the quiet ones, the listeners, they believe. Not in ghosts, not in hauntings, but in love. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to be real. The kind that stays, where the light never fades.